Wow.
Right, unmuted. We're gonna rely on you to find the errors in our calculations, so.
Oh, Amy, did you see my email about meeting with you all regarding the plan?
Melody, how are you? Just, can I?
I think I also.
Busy, I'm sure.
Like, and,
Yeah. Was it you?
like,
Calendar?
yeah, now I'm trying to remember what date it was, but
Oh, whistle,
If-
slate for.
so we had two dates that we thought would be convenient, but the other,
Know what you say.
the 24th, we have that CMAC
Well, we're, you know.
subcommittee. We could always meet after that.
Stick it on the calendar.
I'm stuck.
Okay.
You don't.
Yeah, I heard.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Exactly.
Apparently, if I stick anything on her calendar, she'll meet.
I will be there.
Yeah.
Nick, did you see my follow-up?
Yeah, I've been going through them all one, because like all the localities emailed me back, because I sent that as a
No, I
black
figured,
email.
I figured, yep.
And so that's board week for you guys, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's budget day, all of it,
Okay.
so.
All right, we'll play it fast and loose. Later's probably better anyway, because,
Fast and loose.
What?
Like you playing poker.
keep my cards close to the,
Yeah.
because, yeah, it's gonna be a busy couple of weeks meeting with all of you.
Yeah.
And then we have to get ready. Board, before the bigger board meeting for our board.
It's like the. 11 probably, but. Yeah, runs till 12, we have stuff starting. right at
Respectfully,
12,
we're not
so-
gonna drive down to Stafford
Yeah.
for 20-minute meetings, so.
Good.
We'll give you the whole hour when you guys are free.
Wow,
You ready, sir?
I am. There's Rodney.
Yes,
Coming?
yes, he, okay. Okay, now, should be assured, yep.
Yeah, we're over time, so yes, we're ready. Do you want the give out?
Nope. I hate this thing. It makes me feel like I'm like,
Well, you know, if I get out of hand, then at least you can bang on it.
that's only if your staff turns off the camera. Then I can, but outside of that. All right, good morning, everyone. We're gonna go ahead and get started. I call the April meeting, oh my gosh, of the
Yeah.
TAC to order. So I will turn it over to Connor. Oh,
Oh, okay.
Good morning, Connor.
Jamie Jackson,
Here?
Matt Lahane,
Here.
Paul Aniello,
He's,
Bassam Amin,
Here.
Byron Council,
Here.
Mike Fincham, Melody Fowler,
Here.
Amy Garbarini, Kate Gibson,
Here.
Stephen Haynes,
Here.
Christine Hefner, Okay. Daniel Koenig,
I'm here.
you're here? All right. Nick Miner, Stephen Miner,
Nick is here. I
He's
think
in the
he's in the
hotel.
restroom
okay.
or somewhere.
Who's over there?
Nick Ruiz,
Here.
Bob Schneider,
Bob's,
he's online.
Bob, are you online?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
We need to turn this volume up.
Yeah. Michelle Shropshire,
Here.
Rodney White,
Here.
Capel Akbari, Anderson, Mohammed Benamar, Chelsea Betas, Mike Craig, Adam Derrick, Susan Gardner,
Here.
Todd Horsley, Jacob Paswick, Craig Pennington, Craig Reed, Joe Stainsby, Kimberly Cook, All right, we have a quorum.
Joe, can you just speak again? We've tried to turn the sound up. Just want to check you can hear us and we can hear you. I think he's muted himself. Can anyone online hear us? Oh dear.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Ah, there, that's much better. Thank you.
Is Monday.
Mike, you want to come sit at the table? Well, ask John, I think you might need to give up your seat. We have a committee member over here. Come join.
I'm loud.
Okay. Don't want you to feel left out and lost there as an actual committee member.
All right, so our third item for today is the approval of the TAC agenda for April 3rd. Can I get a motion, please? All right, can I get a second? All right, we have it properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, the agenda will proceed as printed. All right, Ian, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir.
Connor, if you can pull up the policy committee meeting agenda from the last policy committee meeting. I'm going to whip through this real quick because I know we don't like to spend a lot of time on old news. But for those who haven't attended the policy committee, this is just a quick overview. The March one, that's the February one. There you go. There we go. Okay, so we had an approval of a new at-large member to the Bike and Pedestrian Committee. The safety target setting letters, which you all saw at the meeting last time, and the asset condition and system performance targets, which you all saw at the last meeting. We have policy committee approved all of that under the consent agenda, and we sent them over to VDOT head office in Richmond. The workshop I thought was quite useful. We got an outside facilitator to facilitate a workshop on basically congestion, the link between land use and transportation. Does transit help with congestion? Does changing land use help with congestion? Does building new roads help and all that kind of thing? I thought it was a very useful exercise. And there was a tabletop board game on how to put more or less density and how to link units of transportation to the density, and then a presentation of how transit fits in with that and how land use fits in with congestion. And we're hoping this coming month at the policy committee to start talking about what does that mean as a vision for the region, right? Now that we've thought through, we've had presentations on transit by several people over the last few policy committee meetings. Now at a workshop on land use and transportation and transit. What does that mean for us as a region? What should we be doing as a region? And that's where the conversation, I think, should go next. We then had the interim amendments to the CMAC STGB project selection process, and the two items were agreed to: the 10% cap on increases of existing projects. It only applies to existing projects, and it you'll remember the wording of it. It doesn't mean that projects can't get more than 10%. It just means that FAMPO staff can't recommend an increase more than 10%. If more than 10% is required, then a discussion by the policy committee has to happen in order to fund more than the 10%. And the second one is for the TMA bike and the TMA bike and ped project allocation. They agreed to park it for the next round so that the money isn't spent now, but it's left in the balance entry or somewhere. And then I did ask them whether they wanted me to withdraw the request for funding for a potential engineering and river crossing study. And the answer was no, don't withdraw it, but we want to see more information before we take any decision on that. The next item was just the correspondence and the staff and agency reports. It was a short meeting in terms of the agenda because all the time was basically dedicated to the workshop. So that's my summary. Happy to take any questions, but I don't just label this item.
All right, any questions policy committee meeting based on Ian's update?
Documents are all online as well.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, we'll move over to item number 5, which, can we do that? Turn it over to you.
I have a question, item number 5,
Okay,
or item number 6, sorry.
okay.
I haven't got
We'll
there.
start with item number 5, public comment period. So if there are any members of the public here present today or online or on the phone, I'll read the introductory statement. Comments and questions from members of the public are welcome at this time. Staff will also read comments submitted by the public prior to the meeting. Connor, do we have any written comments?
Charlie's there and we don't
Oh,
have.
thank you. All right, any members of the public here that would like to speak today? All right, I will formally close the public comment period. All right, we're going to move over to item number 6, which is the consent agenda. I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
I have one question on 6B, the tip. Will we be able to make edits to the tip after it goes out to public comment?
Yes,
Okay. I just have one edit that I emailed John about last week.
that's fine. If I can just comment on all of the items that need to go out for public comment that we're requesting today. Public comment is at the public comments, right? And then you go and, where necessary, make changes and amendments to the document if the public pick up things that we don't pick up. So that's the whole point of public comment. So the first draft that goes out for public comment is almost never the final draft. It's always, and we invite public, but we also invite our committees, 4 committees at FAMPO, the policy committee, the TAC, the CTAC, and the BPAC to give inputs. And then we revise and edit. Sometimes it's just a small thing like an error, right? We do make errors, especially when we're in a rush. And this is the rush time of the year where we do a lot of things in a short time. So there are always little errors, right? Because it's just a high pressure time and we've got to get all these documents like the UPWP, etc., all out at the same time. And then secondly, if there are material faults, there's in the thing that is, incorrectly done, not just an error, but there's something bigger in there. Then you raise those too, and then we make those changes during the public comment. We just have to do the public comment at this time because we have deadlines. VDOT gives us deadlines. Our internal documents give us deadlines. And so to keep with the deadlines, obviously we start. So you'll see today there are a whole bunch of documents where we want to start the public comment process. But those are not the final version that will get adopted. Otherwise, what's the point of having public comments? It just.
All right, well, for item number 6, we have 2 items on the consent agenda. That's the approval of the March 6th TAC meeting minutes and also endorsing resolution 23-20. And that is literally what Matt just mentioned for the draft tip for FY 24 through 27. So can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
A motion to approve?
Thank you, Paul. Can I get a second? All right, Massam, second it. Any other comments, questions, or changes? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we're moving right along to item number 7, which are action and discussion items. So we'll start with item A. And we have a presentation from Mr. Reed and Mr. Tang.
Yeah, we've got slides up for you. Stephen and Eric, are you able to hear us, and you're going to guide us through the slides?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for having us on the agenda. Stephen Reed here in Central Office of now Traffic Operations Division, a combination of our Operations ITS folks and the Traffic Engineering divisions. So it's an exciting but busy time as well for us in safety and in a changing world. But we were happy to see that so many jurisdictions and NPOs in Virginia received the Safe Streets for All grants. And it's been wonderful to work with you up to this point and sort of get ahead of that for you all in your region. And so we are excited to share with you our draft report on the work that Eric and Sammy have done at VHB in order to set you up for success in terms of safety planning, not only for Safe Streets for All, but for our dedicated safety funds, our highway safety improvement funds, and also to be considering it for smart scale in terms of finding needs that are more at the jurisdiction and regional level as compared to what you find in VTrans for safety needs there. So with that, we'll turn it over to Eric, and we welcome your active participation, questions, and of course, this is your pretty much first time going through this, so a time for you to provide comments on our documentation as well. So Eric.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
All right. And I'll just prompt the advance for the slides. So just like a quick point of information, how much time do you want us to spend here so I can just craft my remarks?
Isn't this typically 10 to 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
10 minutes.
Sounds
per
good.
question.
Yep, so 10 minutes plus questions.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So let's advance to the next slide. So we're just going to basically walk through the draft final report that was distributed to all of you in advance of the meeting. And this is not the only time you'll be able to comment on it. You'll see that we're going to have a 3-week window for you to review the report. So end of the month, we welcome your comments throughout the course of April. So, but basically the report covers the analysis that we conducted, which included the identification of the emphasis areas, the identification of high injury network, how do we accommodate pedestrian bicyclist considerations, an overview list of potential countermeasures and activities that could be implemented as a result of this safety analysis, and then also the development of some crash tree tools that allow you to identify combinations of crash characteristics that help to explain certain crash patterns. All right, so let's advance 2 slides. So when we first engaged all of you, we were thinking from a FAMPO context, but as we recognized from last year's discussion, this study reflects the entire Greater Washington Regional Commission. So our analysis is for the entire region as shown on the map that all of you are familiar with. Let's go to the next slide. You'll see in the report that we, as a comparison, we just wanted to show how this region, from a crash rate perspective, all crashes and fatal crashes, how it compares to other MPOs in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that's what this graph is all about. And then the next 2 slides, if we go to the first one here, this is an interesting way to look information. You know, oftentimes we look at crash data and we look at, okay, there's an impaired driving crash. Great. But as you can imagine, there are multiple factors that crash. Somebody could be speeding, driving drunk, not wearing a seatbelt, et cetera. So you could have combinations of factors. You could have like it's almost like a 6D chess match, right? But you know, to simplify things, what we did at least in this report is to look at things in a 2-dimensional space. So what you see here is KA, which means fatal and serious injury crashes. There's a injury severity scale that VDOT uses, the CABCO scale, as they call it. K being somebody who's killed. A is for a severe injury. B is for a minor injury. C is for a suspected injury, and then O is for property damage only crash. The Virginia Strategic Highway Safety Plan and other documents throughout the United States really focus on the fatal and serious injuries. So what we did here was to take a look at, for that universe of fatal and serious injury crashes, what are those combination of factors that are present in crashes. So here's a two-dimensional space. So if you look at the first column there, roadway departure, you can see that if you read it vertically, of the universe of roadway departure crashes, if you go all the way to the bottom, you can see that the row for impaired is 40%. This means that 40% of your run off the road crashes also involve a driver impairment. So we have this type of table, not only for the entire region, but we also have it for each of the constituent jurisdictions. So each of the 4 counties and the 1 city in your area, sphere of influence, if you will. If you go to the next slide, we did the same thing to include the B level crashes. Because if you think about it, and I pardon me for not showing the numbers earlier on an earlier slide, but there are only so many fatal and serious injury crashes. Obviously, it's one too many, but from a statistical standpoint, we want to make sure that we have enough crashes, if you will, to make inferences as to what those contributing factors are. So we added the B level crashes just to give ourselves a larger pot of crashes to look at. And if you see here, if you look at that same column with roadway departure, and you go to the bottom, 36% of the roadway departure crashes that involve K, A, and B level crashes involve impairment. And then if we go to the next slide, another exhibit that we have in the report from regional level is just to look at 3 levels, overlapping of 3 contributing factors. So in this example for fatal and serious injuries, the KAs, we looked at speeding, impaired, and intersection, and where those crashes overlap. So this is to give you an idea, a flavor of looking at 3 different factors and how they overlap. You can see that 5%, right this center, 5% of your fatal and serious injury crashes involve all 3 of those factors. And all these contributing factors are from VDOT's Power BI database. Centralized repository that VDOT uses consistently for all its safety studies. Let's just jump ahead to, bear with me for a second. If we go to another slide, beyond the KB, we can skip the KB because we did the same thing. So I mentioned earlier from the introduction, we developed a high injury network. The idea here is that you have hundreds of or thousands of miles of roadway, right, in the region. Where can we help you suggest where those key corridors are? Because as you can imagine, you can probably identify a subset of roadways in your region that is the location of the majority of your crashes. And so that's what we did with what we call a high injury network. We developed on a per mile basis the frequency of crashes and isolated, for example, the high injury network is a location of 70% of your KAB crashes. So what is that combination of routes in the region, as well as each of your 5 localities? What is that combination of roadways that is the location of the majority of crashes? So that's what we did here. And you'll see some graphics to accompany that. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see this type of mapping throughout. We did it for the entire region, and we also did for each of the 5 localities. We basically identified that subset of roadways, and we also tiered it. We basically identified, out of the universe of that high injury network roadways, what is tier 1, which is basically the upper half of the roadways that were identified, and then tier 2 is the lower half of the high injury network. So both tiers are on the high injury network. We just tiered it to help you prioritize those locations of interest. And as part of the high injury network, we didn't look at every single little segment, if you will. What I mean by that is that we tried to look at complete corridors. So we didn't, let's say, break out Route 1 into 50,000 pieces, right? We tried to look at Route 1 as a whole because as you're trying to prioritize projects, you're thinking of a corridor, not a quarter mile segment necessarily. That's very hotspot oriented. We wanted to help you think on a larger scale how you could collaborate between jurisdictions as well, and find bang for your buck as you prioritize your projects. And what you also see here on the map are those gray shaded areas. This is where we begin to incorporate that equity level analysis. This shading reflects Virginia Department of Health's Health Opportunity Index, where it looks at a combination of factors like transportation access to healthcare, among other things. There are 12, 13 different factors that lead into that. And those census tracts that are darker in shade have a lower health opportunity index. So this is one way to help prioritize your projects in those areas of a greater need. So what you also see here in the red and pink, the combination of tiered high injury network roadways, is that 62% of your fatal and serious injury crashes are on just 7% of the region's roadways. So this really helps you focus those resources on this 7% of your roadway network. If we go to the next slide, similarly, we did the same thing to include the B level crashes. And in this case, KBs, 75% of your KB crashes are on 13% of your region's roadways. If we go to the next slide, we also took a look at VDOT's pedestrian safety action plan analysis, where they prioritized a series of routes that have a notable pedestrian and bicyclist crash frequency concern. So we overlaid that information onto your network just to give you additional corridors to consider as you prioritize your projects. If we go to the next slide.
Mr. Taylor, just to let you know, we're almost at the 10-minute mark, so
Okay.
just want
All
to
right.
give you a heads up. We are on time.
Sure, no problem. Thank you. Let's skip this one. It's just the expansion of the PSAP. This is an important slide here. A lot of this analysis is going into the development of your safety plan that you receive money from USDOT as part of the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. This study helps to fulfill a lot of those requirements, but there's still some remaining requirements that still need to be fulfilled. And part of the analysis was to look at how your high-injury network overlaid against the underserved census tracts as identified by USDOT. Note, the shaded cells, or census tracts, excuse me, reflect the definitions from last year. The new Notice of Funding Opportunity that came out just this past Friday has updated those definitions. When we did the analysis at a point in time, we identified 5 census tracts. In the new NOFO, all of Caroline County and almost all of Prince George County is considered to be an underserved census tract. This doesn't change our analysis in the report that you received. All it does, it just provides an updated layer on where your high-injury network overlays against those underserved census tracts. And that helps you prioritize your projects, because ultimately USDOT would like to see 40% of the benefits nationwide to be found in these highlighted census tracts. So that was really one thing I wanted to highlight there, was that updated definition. The next 4 slides, you can just scroll right through them. And basically, we did the same type of high-injury network and PSAP analysis with the USDOT layers and the high health opportunity index layers for all your jurisdictions. And we just keep on scrolling down: Spotsylvania, King George, and then lastly, the back of the document has a listing of the countermeasures that could be considered. And then we also have the discussion of implementation on how you could implement projects based on organizational, behavioral, infrastructure context. And then we also have a series of appendices which define all the high-injury network segments in the table. And then lastly, the next slide, as a supplement, I mentioned crash trees. We have this Excel-based tool which allow you to select a series of crash characteristics and find that combination of characteristics that help to identify crash contributing factors within your locality. So on the next slide, yes, this is from last year's NOFO for SS4A. It still applies. Taking a look at the latest NOFO, you still need to fulfill these requirements, but we can expand on that later as we go through comments and questions. So next steps, next slide is basically to get your comments about the report by April 24th. And it will also distribute the crash tree tool for you to download. Ultimately, all those layers that you saw in the report, they're going to be available on VDOT's ArcGIS Online, where you'll be able to look at all the layers that we developed online. And we'll also have the updated USDOT underserved layer as well, so you can see how your high-injury network and other crash characters overlay against the latest definitions from the feds. And with that, take any questions.
All right, thank you, sir. Do we have any questions from any members of the TAC about the presentation?
I have 2 comments, no questions. First one is, I'd just like to thank VDOT for doing this. They did not do this for every region in the state of Virginia. And we did not, as FAMPO, need to pay for this analysis, right? A grant was given by VDOT for this work to be done. So we really appreciate the fact that VDOT has done this for us as an entity. And this provides us, we don't know exactly, but I'm going to guess about 30% of what's needed for the Safe Streets for All action plan. This is the first, maybe third of it. The other 2/3 we will have to do through the grant that we received from the federal government to do the job of finishing this. And the items that still need to be done, you could see on that previous slide, which is in your pack. You have to have a safety monitoring group. We have to have the jurisdictions commit to implementing projects to improve the safety. We have to have a list of projects on those corridors that we've now analyzed to say, well, what are the projects that we're going to implement in order to improve the safety, and public comment on that, right? So those things still have to be done. So the first point is to thank VDOT. My second point is to say, we received an interesting set of emails from the federal staff member that's been allocated to our grant. He is also the federal staff member who's going to deal with our applications for funding for projects under this program. And he's asking us to basically hurry up, if I can use plain English. And so I don't quite know what that means, because we don't actually physically have the funding yet to hire a consultant to finish the job, right? Or we've been allocated the money and we're in the process. Becky is working with CHIP, because including all 5 jurisdictions, to get the contract drawn up and signed so that we can access the funds. And Becky has arranged for us to meet with the gentleman in an online meeting to talk through what his expectations are, etc. I'm guessing from the language in the email that he's hoping we can get this thing done by the close of applications for this round. We never anticipated that, because this round closes on the 10th of July. So we did not expect to be able to finish this by the 10th of July. However, I would encourage every jurisdiction to start, now that we know the locations, the corridors, the block groups and all that are affected. I would encourage our jurisdictions to start thinking of at least one project, right, in those areas, which can be implemented if we get a grant. Because it may be possible that without completely finishing the process, we may complete enough of the factors to give you at least one application possibility before the 10th of July. I'm not making any commitment, because we have to see whether the consultants we choose are able to help us. We have to get back and meet with the federal staff to find out exactly what things need to be in place before you can apply for this round. But he seems to be in a big hurry for us to apply for grants to construct something. Don't know why. We will find out. It may be that because the grant only lasts for a certain number of years, they're not getting enough applications currently. Sounds like it is the case. But maybe just if each jurisdiction thinks of one project on those corridors, we can see if we're able to get some of the work done, enough of the work done that it would support an application. We'll need a vote from your board to support, and it will need to have public engagement and various other things. So just bear that in mind.
Thank you, sir. Any other?
Yeah, Ian, just one quick question.
Yes.
The timing for that, like when would you see jurisdictions needing to kind of come forward with their one project?
So Matthew just looked up online while he was sitting next to me. The deadline for this year's round of funding for projects is the 10th of July. Now that's very close in terms of being able to do phase 2, because they haven't yet given us the cash, if I put it like that. Basically means federal approval of the contract, the sign, etc., to access the funds to appoint the consultant to actually do the work. So it's a bit of cart before the horse. you know, you want us to give you the completed project before you've given us the money to complete the project. That's the kind of message I'm getting from the federal authorities. And he literally says that in writing. Don't wait till you've got the money. I'm like, how can I do that? It's not legal for me to do that. So we'll find out on the phone call with him what it actually means. But the deadline to get your project in is the 10th of July this year. We had not intended to try to get something in this year. We intended to do a nice proper job and to submit proper applications next year. So for next year, we're hoping you will submit a long list of applications for this particular program. But it is money to improve safety for pedestrians, for cyclists, for motor people driving automobiles on all of those corridors. It's a big program, and they've got a substantial amount of funding in the billions of dollars. That's all I know.
All right, but you do want people to consider applications for this year
I'm just saying
or less?
I can't promise anything, but if I were you, I would start thinking of 1 or 2 projects in your jurisdiction that might be ready, right? That are closer to being ready for an application, because we might be able to get those in if we will find out for you and come back to the next TAC meeting, having met with the gentleman. Hopefully we'll have got the contract fully drafted and submitted for them to sign, and we will need to choose a consultant. We have gone ahead and got quotations that are ballpark estimates from 2 of our on-call contracts, and either of them could do the job. It's got to be, because it's federal money, it's got to be competitive. So we got multiple quotations. We would recommend one to you at the next TAC meeting, which of those 2 to proceed with, and then we'll take it to the policy committee to approve.
All right, sounds good. Anybody have any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to item B, which is Route 610. Matt, I don't know if you want to start or if you want me to start.
I can start. So thank you. So this is in consideration of a scope change to the Route 610 operational study. So Stafford County, we have been looking to change the $75,000 that's available in SDBG funding to a multimodal study of the area around Route 610, our Garrisonville Road Service District. And we have a description of that work and a task ready to go. We just need to get approval of that money. So originally this was for a operational study. Information I've been able to gather, it was from 2017 or 2018, I think. And the 75,000 was originally supposed to be matched with money potentially from VDOT for the operational study. As that didn't pan out, we are looking in part to change it to a multimodal study to suit some of our needs up in the Route 610 area.
All right, and for the operational study, what does that consist of?
I do not have any information on that. I think it was from Joshua Road to Route 1. I'm not certain of the, Joshua Road to Route 1. And that's all I have for this matter.
Intersection improvements, correct?
Okay.
All we know
So
is have.
focus on roads and intersections. Okay. All right. Linda, do you have any comments?
Yeah. We need to have a discussion about the process of accepted by the committees. Authorization.
So we don't mind what you put in your study and you know what the purpose is. We handed it to the county because the first set of money that was allocated some years back wasn't being spent. So we said to the county, get going, you do it. We're not going to run it out of our office because it affects your needs. And then there was the request to provide additional funding. So I think, John, you did allocate the funding in this spread. So we have allocated the additional funding that you requested. So we don't mind, but John and I were discussing it, and we do think you might have some difficulty with getting federal approval because you're changing the scope and the beginning and end location, and you can't just, you might have to withdraw it from the federal thing and resubmit a new project. You might not just be able to change the scope, but anyway, we're not going to get involved in that. We don't care. We will support you as a county to do it however you want, provided VDOT can help you with getting the federal approval. We're okay with that. So we're not going to tell you what to do. we've given the extra funding in the allocation if it's approved, if everybody agrees, but we've recommended the funding, and we would rely on you as county at BDOT to get together on getting that federal approval. We won't interfere with it, but we do think that you might not just be able to amend the termini and change the scope. You might have to withdraw it and resubmit it, but that's fine. Either way, it's not going to affect FAMPO. We have to allocate the funding and for you to run with the project.
All right.
It's just that we're just cautioning, saying, John was looking through rules and saying, hey, you might have a problem with the federal rules.
Yeah, and that's why I was asking the question. Vita, do y'all have any comments on this?
Well, I was gonna ask you, what are the ones, where were the ones in the original? From I-95, this is I-95.
So limits from the original study were Joshua Road to, I'm not sure if it was Route 1 or I-95.
It was Route 1.
It was Route 1?
The entire corridor has shifted slightly west. So it's jumped from Route 1 to 95, and then the western termini also jumped a little bit further west, but that's not an issue because you're extending the termini, not contracting it. It's the contraction on the east.
Yeah, we're just following our service district, which is Garrisonville Road, and then a mile or so around roadway.
So this is just a question, would Stafford be better off keeping the original, basically eastern kind of termini, even maybe if they're not going to do much between Route 1 and 95?
Potentially, yeah. If you're changing both the scope and the termini, that's when things start getting, if you kept the scope or the termini the same, then I don't think there would be any major issues if you add on to the scope. But the fact that adding on the scope and then shifting the project, I think Federal Highway might look at that as it's a different project and therefore it needs to basically be redone. So
You might want to consider that.
We would need to have the additional 75,000 from somewhere as well for that. We can pull it off the existing project as we're doing now, or
Find it. So, I mean, unless the jurisdictions or state partners disagree, I don't think we have a problem with allocating the funding. It was allocated some years back, the 75, and it's still there. And we're not, I mean, unless you all want to do something, we're not planning on taking it away. And the additional funding, we as staff at any rate are happy to allocate it. It was asked for, and it seems within the policy that we are able to do that. So funding we're not worried about. We're just worried about the federal authorization maybe not being as easy as we think it is. So we're not planning on removing any of the money. But we just have to make sure.
If I can get policies, everybody, saying we have the additional money and we agree to the scope change, I can work my magic like I always do, and I will more than likely be able to get it probably. I won't say it might be 3 weeks, but have at least 14 days to approve. But due to the fact that I'm amending it, I could say that it might take, say a month maybe, once I get everybody's approval to do so.
So, I mean, I think
Scope change.
then we just need to ask the TAC whether they would recommend the project to continue with changes. And if they're happy with that, I don't have a problem with that.
what's the problem with keeping it at 95?
Any questions from members of the TAC? So is the project in the same vicinity, Matt? Okay.
Garrisonville Road.
When I say vicinity, I mean not just Stafford County.
It's
Yeah,
on,
Garrisonville Road.
it's on the same road
Okay.
corridor, but they're slightly moving the start and the end points.
It's an area. It's the commercial and the residential around the roadways.
Okay, does anybody have any issues, comments, concerns?
The outcome of the study is the same, or like the intended outcome.
The intended outcome is multimodal
Okay.
improvements.
So the outcome is enhanced. Instead of it
Okay.
being roadway, it's now multi.
I see.
So
So that, as a result, the buffer of analysis has to be increased around.
We won't be focusing on a set of roadway improvements. We'll focus on a set of bike path
Okay.
improvements.
Any other comments? I mean, I think my only comment is just what does this look like in the future if other projects need scope changes or,
But it's a project then you applied for.
right?
That's the only problem that goes against your prioritization process. It should-
So, I mean, we could take a hard line on it, but I don't think we should. I think that it's not a huge amount of money. It's a project which the FAMPA was happy with in the past. It's on the same corridor. It's effectively the same amount of money. I mean, if you want to, we can take a really hard line and say no, put the money back in the balanced entry and reallocate it somewhere else. But I would imagine then the county would apply for the new project and ask for the funding again. So then all we're doing is really, but it's the tax recommendation that is needed, not Ian Hollis's recommendation or the FAMPO staff recommendation. And we don't, as FAMPO staff, all 100% agree on the details. We've workshopped it, we've argued with each other. At the end of the day, we kind of feel that, you know, this is a project the county believes in. It's within our methodology to approve this kind of project. It is a funny process to getting there, because some money was allocated for only the roadway and now they want it multimodal and they need this extra funding. The point for me is if they left it with the existing scope and asked for that additional funding, we would have probably given the additional funding anyway. So it's not a question of, for us, whether the funding would have been needed. It would have been needed because it's a complicated study, even with the original scope. So I don't think, I mean, Alex, when he was still here, was saying that we need a small amount of additional funding to finish this project when it was still a roadway project. So the funding would have been, I think, given anyway. So we're being nice by saying to the county, yes, we'll allow you to change the project. And I'm okay with being nice if everybody else is. But again, I don't have a vote, right? Even on this thing, even on this committee, I don't have a vote. I'm just suggesting to you all what you should do, but it's entirely your decision.
Just a point of clarification, the project was originally submitted, I think, 2017. I think at that point in time, there wasn't a roadway transit or active transportation designation. So I think it was when the project was submitted, it wasn't that designation. So it's an issue. And it's all STBG study funds. So it's same. It would be a study regard, whether or not it's important.
Any other comments? Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, I don't have any issue in this literally 5 minutes, but my concern is the same as Michelle's, because it is a scope change. I understand we still go through the process, and I understand that we would still have to apply and rescore, and we may just get back to the same point 10 years from now, but we also have, especially through the CMAQ SCBG process, spent a lengthy amount of time about how we were going to score and grade projects. And now we're saying, for this one,
Well, this project would have been, I assume, it's before my time. I wasn't here in 2017, but I assume there was a process to choosing the original project. It wasn't just like, hey, have some money.
No, but I'm talking about the scope change. We're not talking about the project. We're talking about the scope change.
Right.
It's different than what we're saying. So I get your point, and I'm not anti your project, Matt. I say if you need to make it work and it adds multi-media component and gets cars off roads, great. But I'm just saying it is not what we have been saying.
So I think then the request would be, does the TAC want to support the scope change, or does the TAC want to not support
Correct.
the scope change? I think that's the decision we need from the TAC.
So a motion to support?
Second. Second that.
Any
And
comments?
fair, just so y'all know. Any comments from the group? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. We will hear back from VDOT whether it actually goes through FHWA, which is what actually ends up mattering.
Yeah, if not, it'll have to be withdrawn and start a new
But
process.
that will give us good feedback too, if it does get approved on how the process actually should work, so.
Would we include that in our formal project selection guide?
Yes.
Like, if feedback was received from FHWA saying, no, this type of thing can't be done, would we put that in?
So the subcommittee of the CTAC and, the TAC subcommittee on CMAQ and SDGB should consider that in terms of the text of our policy. Like, what do we do if an applicant wants to change the scope substantially? What do we do?
Yeah.
Right? I think we should have a method to deal with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Good.
All right, we are on item C.
So for this next project, John is
Wait,
gonna.
one second.
Oh, sorry.
Could you make sure to send us limits and scope?
Yeah, I can send the map and scope.
So with this next project, I mean, every year this is a difficult process, and every year we want to change the methodology because we don't like the outcomes, and we do that. And every year, people get some of their projects funded and some of their projects not funded, and every year people are happy and unhappy, and we go through this process, right? So it's that time of the year again. We're doing it again, and we tried to make reasonable allocations. One of the it's emailed to you in your pack, but we try to do our best, but you know,
There's only so.
first of all, sometimes we make errors because we're human, and the time we have to make these allocations every year is short. And this year it's particularly short. We got the numbers from VDOT late. Now,
Next point.
Nick, we got the dollar values very late, and we had to turn this around quickly. Do you all understand the reason we have to turn this around quickly? Because you need to understand why we do this,
I think
right?
we need to explain it again.
So we take a long time doing the scoring of projects because we have the time. But we don't have the luxury of time when it comes to allocating the cash. And the reason for that is we have to, correct me if I'm wrong, VDOT, but we have to get our policy committee to vote through the proposed list of projects in May every year, right? That's my understanding. So if I have to get it through in May so that the CTB can vote at their June meeting to adopt it, that means that I need to get it out in April. Why do I need to get it out in April? Well, because the policy committee has given me very strict guidance that I should not bring them big funding amounts to approve without them having seen it before. They don't like last minute surprises on big funding. So this is our big funding every year. And so I have to get it to the policy committee in April so that they can think about it for a month and make suggested changes and updates and whatever else they want to do. And what you want to do is recommend different changes and updates so that when we present it in May, it's not new information. They've seen it, you've all seen it, everybody's seen it, and they can then adopt it as amended with confidence because there are no surprises. So that's why we have to get it to you in the April meeting. The April meeting is always the first week of April. And you know, we get the dollar values that we have to allocate, and like Susan, I forget the date you sent it to me, but it was right near the end of March. So it's a short time. So because it's a short time, yes, sometimes we make little errors. So forgive us, we are only human. And so I'm asking first of all for two things. First one is, especially to Susan, please look for the errors. You may find an error in this table, but you might also not be right, because sometimes when you find 3 errors, you're right, one of them is an error, but 2 of them you haven't quite understood what's going on. So don't get too upset. Just think through the things with us. We'll find if there's an error. Second thing is, you might not like the way we've done the allocations, right? Every jurisdiction always likes some of what we do every year, and they don't like some of what we do every year. That's normal. I must tell you that we found an error in last year's allocation. Susan pointed it out to us when you came for that workshop a couple of weeks ago. The reason for that error is that staff who are no longer with us made those allocations using an Excel spreadsheet which has formula in it. And if those formula make a mistake, you don't always pick it up. So what I've done this year is we've started a brand new spreadsheet. There's no formula from the past in this one. So there's nothing hidden there that comes from years ago that's going to mess up the formula, because it was quite a big error, right? It was over $100,000 that was wrong on last year's allocation, and we did not pick it up. But the staff that worked on it are no longer here. So we fixed the error. We had to make allocations. We fixed the error in this year's round. The error is fixed. And we started a spreadsheet that has no history. So we only copied over the dollar values into the new spreadsheet, no formulas, to make sure that we weren't copying formulas that could wreck the whole thing. It's still possible an error could creep in. And the second thing is, if you don't like the allocation, that's fine. Every year somebody doesn't like something, we can discuss it and we can decide as a group, or you can decide, because I don't get a vote. If you want to take, 100,000 from one project and put it on another project as the recommendation to the policy committee, that's fine. But at the end of the day, remember, we have to abide by the rules of the methodology we have. And the policy committee actually takes the decision. We don't take the decision. We just recommend things. We're happy to deal with all of that. So I'm going to ask John just to run through how we did it, exactly what was done. Then we'll take questions. Then we'll deal with, if anybody picks up errors, we'll deal with those. If anybody picks up things which they don't think we should do in the methodology, they think we want to change it and do it differently, that's fine too.
All right, and I know you may have some excitement, but let's leave that to the end.
Can I ask one question just about the error from last year? Was that a over allocation?
Yes.
Fiscal year 27. And
And how much money then does that take out of?
$125,000, but with being able to shift projects around, I can do that without necessarily reducing everybody's budget.
So that's why we had to do some shifts, and you'll see that. And Susan found it. Thank you, Susan. But only found it like recently. So, and the reason it was hard to see is because if you didn't know the formula that was putting the money there, you didn't realize that that formula was putting the money in two different places, right? The same money, and that was an error. And we didn't pick it up. None of us. I didn't pick it up, simply because we didn't know that this formula was doing that behind the scenes.
Technically, there are two errors, but yeah, it accumulated into.
But the column didn't. Yeah. The column appeared to add up, but it actually didn't add up. That's what happened.
All right, so again, please hold questions to the end, even if John tells you something that makes you want to scream. It's okay. You'll have to wait.
Okay. So we are adding just under $13 million to our CMAQ STBG and now the carbon reduction program. Of course, it's not all $12 million hitting at one time. It's distributed over several years here. So we're going to have to kind of balance how those funds are being allocated throughout, because they'll hit at different amounts at different times. This includes nearly a $2 million rollover from previous funds that came in under budget or the project moved. So we do have additional money available more immediately than traditionally what we expect. So we're looking at the rollover funds. Kind of the staff approach was we had a very large pot of CMAQ funds. CMAQ funds are more restrictive than STBG funds, and so what we looked for was projects that had CMAQ funding that had very large STBG balances. So that allowed us to do a swap to swap. That kind of frees up the staff's ability to apply funds to any project. As I can use STBG project, I can't use CMAQ on every project. So that allows easy switch. So I basically look to pull as much STBG as we could. We also look to try to identify projects with jurisdiction inputs to try to figure out, okay, when do jurisdictions need the money? We have an additional kind of conversation probably coming up as a result of that. In addition, with the carbon reduction program, I've targeted trying to apply those funds to active transportation and transit projects. Carbon reduction is fairly new. We are allowed to use it on CMAQ roadway projects, but it's only on very specific projects. It's not necessarily I can apply it to anyone's. And without going through the full scope of all existing projects, it's just easier to try to pull existing STBG money, swap in some CMAQ money, and try to free up more STBG, because again, that's the flexible funding pots. So that's kind of how we did it. And then applying carbon reduction funds forward after FY24, we kind of still targeted that and rotated those funds between jurisdictions when possible, when there was an applicable funding category for that. In a couple of years, there's only one or two projects that could be potentially added into it without going through kind of a much more in-depth review of some of the projects. So After that, so the next step in developing this is we actually developed a base allocation process. So we applied all the funds in a very simplistic manner according to the methodology. So we applied the 5% set asides. We applied the rollover funds and any additional funding requests. And then we applied everything for FY 28 and 29 based on the percentages on the roadway transit active study approach. And then we kind of took a pause. And then once we had that done to the methodology, we then looked to basically swap funds between the years to try to either expedite or manage kind of cost increases or other needs between funds. So when you rotate funds, swap funds earlier for another project and back, particularly if they're already fully funded, moving backwards, you kind of always free up a little extra money for that fiscal year. So you'll see FY 27, 28, and 29 start to have a little bit of a cost or a balance increase, just because if you swap between FY 28 and FY 29, 29 has a little bit more money, but I can't move all of that pot earlier. I can only do it as much as FY 28. Whatever the earliest years, that kind of caps things. So we applied that, and yeah, that was kind of the process that we used moving forward. So
Go back. Sorry, go back. Just to look at some of those other points, just a couple of comments. The new projects, the allocations that are in your pack are for approximately the top 2 projects in each category. Now, I want to make this point because we hit this thing every year. The methodology doesn't say how you should fund projects in the sense of, yes, you must fund the top scoring project first, but then how far down the list you go, right? And as I've told you many times, I don't like room for interpretation in the methodology. And it's a very selfish reason I don't like it. So call me selfish. Here's the selfish reason. If the methodology doesn't specify exactly how staff are meant to do the allocation, then when somebody gets cross in that round's allocation because they don't like the way staff have done it, then we have to take the punch to the face, right? Because we chose to do it that way. I don't want us as staff to be able to make choices. In fact, I prefer it if the methodology is so tight that I don't have room for interpretation, because I don't want it. I'll happily give it back to you so you can fight with each other, because we don't as staff want the room for interpretation. However, this is one case where we had to interpret the methodology. It doesn't say what you do after you fund the first project. We could give every project $50,000 and fund all of them with a tiny amount, but we felt that is a bit of a waste, because then you have all these little amounts of money sitting on a lot of projects which you can't actually get into construction. However, you as the TAC may advise us as the staff that you want us to do that, right? We took the approach, we fund roughly the top 2 projects in each category with a lot more money than funding 7 projects in each category with a small amount of money. But we can do it. There's nothing stopping us from doing it. The methodology doesn't specify. Please take that ability to interpret that away from me. Please put something in the methodology so I don't have to make that call, that John doesn't have to make that call, because we really don't want to get blamed as the bad guy. But that's what we did. So if you don't like it, feel free to change it. But that's the principles we follow. I don't want the ability to interpret it, because then I'm the bad guy always. It's very selfish, I know, but that's the way it is.
We will not punch you in the face, Leah.
Metaphoric.
Oh, okay. I was just wondering, because some of us are a little testy, so we might get us on the wrong day. Right, exactly. King George, watch out. All right.
So I'll walk down each one of these projects that we applied funding to. The first one is Spotsylvania Route 1 and South Point Jug Handle intersection improvements. We funded this because it was a dual CMAQ STBG. It has just over $2.5 million. It was awarded the 50% of the, 60 and 65% roadway split for both FY 28 and FY 29. because Spotsylvania's preference was to try to free up as much money as early as possible for the Orphan Blue project. We shifted its 28 money with the Orphan Blue 126 project for those 2 years. So it's receiving all of its dual funding in FY29. So that can free up and kind of additional money to move the Orphan Blue project forward. We were able to figure out a way to fully fund the Spotsylvania Route 1 and 126 Orphan Blue project. We're using both FY24 rollover money. There was a funding swap with FY26 and 27 funds as well as it got us pretty close, about $16,000 from that. And so we added that into FY24, so it kind of bumped it up. It's actually receiving $191,000 more than it would have received in just FY28 or 29, but because we don't have that 50% restriction in earlier years, we're able to just say, okay, let's give it its $16,000 that was initially.
I made another fatal mistake. I assumed that if I emailed all of you and said, can you tell us which years your projects need the funding, that it would make it a more peaceful process, but I think Stafford will tell you that it didn't work well, and so I mistakenly thought I could avoid a problem there, but perhaps we haven't avoided a problem there.
So the next project was the Gateway Boulevard Shared Use project. It received its full 50% funding allocation in its active transportation for CMAQ funding. It was kind of in a unique situation that for fiscal year 27, there was a limited capacity to find projects that are qualified for the carbon reduction program. And so we decided that was our top scoring active project. There was no other kind of swappable project that would be easily getting carbon reduction programs that didn't already have carbon reduction money on it. And so that was applied for that year to park that money for that project. We also, for the next one, we also partially funded the Route 17 sidewalk access project with CMAQ funding. It kind of got the 50% funding for both active transport there. Yes.
Very quick question. The 50% funding, was that $700,000 or was it the
50% is just from CMAQ. So there's no percentage restriction for carbon reduction, but it is how much I can apply to CMAQ.
So that's where the extra on Gateway Boulevard comes in.
Mhm.
So the 50% of CMAQ was the $486,000.
That's correct. It works out to be approximately that, yes. So Route 17 received CMAQ FY28 $29. Moving over to the transit side, transit amenities was a relatively small project. It received STBG for $78,000. We then partially funded replacement vehicles through STBG, I believe. If I'm sorry, CMAQ. Sorry, that's why I'm reading wrong. For just under $300,000, partially funded new vehicles through CMAQ. It's a slightly larger pot of funds there made available. And then we partially funded the Route 217. Initially, this was going to be carbon reduction, but it's operational. So we're going to have to make a swap with probably CMAQ funding for that just because it's not really eligible. But since every jurisdiction receives some type of carbon reduction funds throughout the process. Spotsylvania didn't, so we applied this. It was actually the third place scoring project in the CMAQ transit category, but we said, hey, we have extra carbon reduction funds, so we're going to apply it to this. So we're kind of able to reach out because also within the transit scope, the replacement vehicles and new vehicles both received funding, and so this was the next transit thing that we could apply additional funds towards. So with that, we're slowly going to go over how we scroll down just a little bit. Cutting it. So those were the new projects that received funds. For existing funds that we were able to kind of move and shift funds around, both using the rollover money as well as kind of just where if we had carbon reduction funds that freed up money in one fiscal year to cover the cost increase somewhere else, we kind of borrowed from there. We funded the 610 operational study or multimodal study to the requested amount. We funded the Onville Road up to its requested amount. Stafford Borough sidewalks, we funded up to its requested amount, as well as the Route 1 Enon Road up to its requested amount. We also had FY26. So the methodology is a little bit unique. So it's an underfunded study, and therefore we have to apply funds to any project that is currently listed as underfunded, and we used both a funding swap as well as carbon reduction funds to provide an additional allocation to the replacement vehicles for Fredericksburg Go in FY26. And then because it was a priority, we just used funding swaps to kind of facilitate orphan blue at that point in time based on the information provided. So that was basically the summary of projects that were existing. And then finally, this is the breakdown of how we funded studies. So kind of a comment that was made back in November was that if we had any additional IIJA funds that would become available because we had such a gap in the number of studies that we could potentially do, and that's a kind of a big liability as far as getting projects ready to compete with additional funds. We kind of moved money around so that some of the additional funds could be kind of freed up for these studies. So we're able to basically go down our entire studies list and fund every single study. The only one that was kind of in the out years is the high capacity transit study, but we are able to find and basically move money around to fund the I-95 Harrison Road interchange study as requested, the Fredericksburg VCR ADA study as requested. Of course, there were additional funds for the 610 operational study, as well as looking into doing the both high capacity river study. It's about, I think you requested $1.1 million. We can get about basically the full allotment for out year STBG funds, as well as the river crossing study also within this. So we are going to basically make a fair amount of study money available now to hurry up, kind of get those hopefully going forward so that they can compete with additional funds later on. And so, yes, the next steps are basically to open and receive public comment as well as your comment here today, incorporate edits and changes, and seek policy committee approval in May. So, yes.
I did do what I was asked in the CMAC STGB subcommittee. I called Richmond Plan RVA to ask them the question about whether they were proceeding to make allocations with this potential CTB decision to fund additional money on the shortfall of smart scale projects that were already in the system. So a couple of comments from Richmond. The first one is they are not actually aware of this potential decision by the CTB to fund the shortfall on smart scale projects. So they have decided that they are going to proceed with their allocations in the way that they do every cycle. So they're just going to allocate their CMAC and STGB and carbon reduction money as if there's going to be no other funding for any projects. And they will, if any small scale projects that need additional funding get funded, they will review that over the summer, and in August or so make amendments to their CMAC and STGB allocations. So they're, in other words, they're not going to wait to see what happens. They're going to make allocations. They can always then go in August and make a new set of allocations. So that was the response I got to but I did call around to ask what they were planning to do. Seems that not very much information is circulating about potential of that additional funding shortfall being funded by the CTB.
All right, questions for the group? On anything that John has presented? Paul?
So just on that first point on the public comment, is that something that's required by either federal highway or the state?
I mean, yes.
Now-
For
Go ahead.
application, saying, yes.
And I guess the reason why I asked, like FAMPO has historically not done that. So has there been something that's changed recently that has to be advertised?
I mean, we're gonna be putting it into the, tip, so yes. It's kind of tied together.
Is it federal money? CMAC and STGB.
Yes.
So for federal money allocations, do we not have to have a public comment?
So for the tip you do, but I
Not for-
guess like, and I understand ultimately the tip is going to be kind of reviewed as well as, UPWP has got public comment. But here, I don't think the allocations have to go out. I guess my question is, it seems like there are probably going to be some changes, and I know that the FAMPO staff have done a lot of work. But I mean, this hasn't really been vetted, and I know there was the work that Stafford did that maybe not all the money was allocated, and I guess I just would kind of advise some caution in terms of going out with this right now if we are going to advertise it. I don't think it's ready.
Since I've been here, we have been putting it out for public comment, but I'm open to guidance from VDOT or DRPT if there's not such a requirement.
It's going to be adopted by the policy committee. It's going to be basically available for comment at that. So I mean,
it's already public now, right? Because we have the public in the meeting, it's online, and the allocations in their draft form are already on the website. So, it is already out in the public now, but I'm not sure, not hearing any comments from anybody about whether the allocations at an MPO level have to have.
We had the hearing on all of our funds. I don't know why this would be different. The 36 points. We have to have a public hearing. We have to put it out to the public 30 days in advance. All of the, I had one of the projects was 25 million. I have to make sure that that's added by April so I can get that out for the public hearing that opens in April and ends in May. So everything I've always done has had to have a public hearing. So I don't know why this would be different. I can double check, but
No, I was a comment on your report. The communication I sent, and it went to several members here, is that the staff, VDOT staff recommendation to the CTV is going to be to fund the shortfalls. It's not that the CTV is going to fund them, it's going to be a recommendation to them. So I would make sure you change your bullet point to say the CTV is going to consider
Yes.
those funding those shortfalls. They
Noted.
can vote yes or they can vote no.
Exactly. So,
The staff recommendation for that.
John, if you could just change the wording on that slide for any future committees. No, that's true. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Paul, my suggestion, and I'm open to guidance here. I'm not the fountain of all knowledge. My suggestion is that at least we should have public comment on the list of projects. The dollar amounts on which goes to where, we are happy to say here publicly that, we will take changes and amendments and all that on the dollar amounts. We often make changes to documents during the public comment period. If somebody feels that the list of projects that we're funding, that we should fund other projects, but ones that are not funded, then maybe we need to talk about that. But if it's that this is the list of projects, but we want to change the dollar values, that's fine. We can do that during public comment. However, if we don't think these are the list of projects, there's some ones, the ones that scored less well that we're going to add. then I think we need to hear from this body if there are projects that we should add. And it goes back to that point, do we fund the first couple projects or do we fund more projects? That's the question. If we can solve that question today, we can have ongoing conversations about the dollar values and bring the revised one to the May TAC. Mike's waving over there.
Okay. Mike.
Two questions about that. Stop the dialogue about the solar.
I would just say for the public comment, Susan has already said that she can check and see if that is a requirement, or, to what I think I'm hearing Paul say, is it only necessary when we do the tip and you actually basically have final numbers and you're updating the document. So I think that should be able to alleviate that question, because I don't recall having done that before either, Paul, as far as draft allocations, but that should be an easy question to answer. That doesn't mean that we don't move forward with this, because if the answer is yes, then we don't want to set ourselves back either.
And I'll say, I'm not trying to hold things up, but I would just, as a suggestion, maybe check with Richmond and Hampton Roads to see what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Hampton Roads is only when there's a tip amendment. But
I don't believe we've historically ever done a public comment for CMAC or STG.
So we did when I was here, but before I can't say.
I didn't see one on the agenda from last year.
No?
so let's check on that answer, Susan, if you can get us any type of feedback, that would be great. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and then if anybody else has any other questions, then we'll follow up with Ian's question. Sorry.
I've got two. On the 2 bullet points, CTB actions, I think I'm following this, but want to make sure. You guys have clearly done a lot of work on this. I appreciate the work. Like Paul said, this is really good. I think it's understandable. Was this funding model built without any additional CTB funding? Okay.
Yes.
So what you're saying in your 2 bullets is this is our funding plan now. If the CTB makes a decision to fund shortfalls, a lot of this money then becomes available for other projects.
Correct.
And that's our potential working path.
Correct.
We're going to be conservative and say the CTB's not going to do anything, and this is the amount.
Yeah, this is kind of the worst case scenario. This is like, if we don't get anything else from anywhere else, this is the proposal.
I'm only going to nitpick you on one. You had mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, Ian, there's been some dialogue on the river crossing. We have $600,000 here.
Yes.
To study that crossing. Can you, and what the policy committee study, I thought I understood, but I'm not sure.
So I asked them, should I withdraw? Because you remember, I was asked last meeting, and I said that because we've been asked to work on this project, I submitted a request for the funding of the work that PAMPO staff can't do, right? Which would be a separate study, the engineering and the NEPA work, which has to be done separately. So there was some discussion here at the last TAC meeting. So I went to the policy committee. They didn't initially understand what I was saying, but I tried to explain it again, saying, do you want me to withdraw that request for funding, right? And there was some discussion, and I think they thought initially I was asking them to approve the dollar values. I said, no, I'm not asking you to approve the dollar values. That you're going to do later when you've seen the results of this phase of the study. So asking whether you want me to withdraw the request for the funding, simply because of the clawback. Once you've allocated all the funding to everybody, now you want to come along to City of Fredericksburg and say, no, we're taking away your money for your buses because we now want to fund the study. Put the claw money back once you've already allocated it. So they said, no, don't withdraw your request, but we're not going to approve the funding until we've seen the results of this phase of the study. That's the understanding I got from the meeting. So that's where it is now.
One comment
if
on
the,
that, in terms of prioritization of this list.
yes,
That's a major investment. It is primarily focused on automotive mobility between the localities. I think you're doing good work studying it. I don't know that it's complete. Clearly, the policy committee doesn't think so either to allocate this fund. There are several other longstanding regional goals, specifically about grade separated crossings of the VCR trail that were scored in this round and are not on this list of funded. I'd suggest if the alternative arises and we're not ready to move forward with the river crossing study, that we put one of those two into that slot and allocate that money in that direction.
The results of this phase of the study are going to be presented in the May policy committee meeting. And we've booked the VDOT venue because there's a lot of public interest in the issue. If after that presentation, the policy committee decides we're not going to fund the next phase, we don't want to, that money will go back into the balance entry on that same night, right? That night, effectively the policy committee is saying, no, not going to fund it, put that money in the balance entry. And then that will require this body to then recommend putting that money to another project. So it's not, we're not approving that money at this stage. We're just saying this is a potential project to fund. And if it doesn't get funded, the money then gets put back in the balance entry for reallocation to the next projects. And I mean, I'm hearing that you're recommending those two projects.
That would still go through the scoring criteria.
Yeah.
So if it got scored, then we would still be able to fund it. But if it was behind, let's say this is the order, then we would be really down in our pecking order.
They would all be money that gets put back in the balance entry then goes to be funding in the order that projects are scored.
Correct. All right, Paul.
So another general question on this slide, the very last kind of bullet there, staff recommends FAMPO make any additional allocations of CMAQ, CRPs, SPG funds in August. What does that mean? Because I mean, right now, aren't we kind of fully allocating the funds that we have?
But the language maybe needs to be tweaked there, and I think Michelle's point from earlier that the CTB may or may not fund shortfalls on existing projects. So you remember the last meeting, I think it was Stafford who made a plea that we don't wait in the hope that the smart scale projects all get funded by the CTB. So we didn't. We funded projects which potentially the CTB could fund, potentially. We don't know, right? So if the CTB does fund additional funds towards the shortfall, might not be 100% of the shortfall, it might be $1, it might be $1 million, who knows? That would then effectively free up some of the CMAQ and SCGB money that we're allocating on those small scale projects, which we'd then put that in the balance entry. And then in August, we would come back to this body and say, well, there's an extra 500,000 or whatever. Well, there's an extra 500,000 of CMAQ and SDGB that we allocated to, say, name one of your smart scale projects. I can't think of one. Enon Road. Enon Road has now been 99% funded by the CTB's additional allocation. So we've now got that CMAQ money back. And the policy committee decided we're not going to go further with the river crossing study. We've got that money back. So we now have a little pot of funding. We would then come back to you in August and say, we have X amount of additional funding that's been freed up. It's not new money. It's our money that's just been freed up because there are other things going on. We then would be able to allocate those to projects which didn't get funded in this round because they were the third one on the list, or however. I mean, we'll take guidance, provided it's within the agreed policy. We'll take guidance from the TAC as to what you think we should do with the money that would come back.
So are those the only two kind of projects that could fall into that category?
Well, not two projects, two kinds of projects, because the CTB may fund any of those smart scale projects that are on the list. And I'm not sure, Michelle, whether it's also other existing projects or if it's only the smart scale ones that are being considered. I don't know. So it's the smart scale ones. So any of the smart scale ones that get funding with a shortfall could come back to us, and any of the studies which the policy committee decides they don't want to fund would then, and then you guys would give us guidance on what you think should be done with that money.
So I just want to make sure I'm tracking basically with smart scale projects. I mean, we have some on the list. I guess my understanding is they weren't receiving any funding at this time because we're hoping that kind of the CTB will fully fund them, or we'll get kind of federal earmark funding or something else. Would those come back if they're not funded, like in August, and potentially have another chance to get additional funding?
So we don't, yes, I guess, we don't have a view as staff on what should happen to that extra money. So because it's an unusual situation, we feel it must follow a policy that is agreed by FAMPO, but we don't have a view on how to do that.
So it would come back. We'd still see
It would
this
come
project.
back to here, and then we would take your recommendations. I mean, the logical thing is to take the next project on the list, but you could equally say, what about further funding those that are already on the list, right? I don't know. There's some gray areas in the policy which don't tell exactly what to do under certain circumstances, and then we have to just do our best within the existing policy to also use our brains and be logical when we don't have a rule. You know, what is logical to do under the circumstances? But we'll take your guidance as the TAC. That's what you're here for, is to give us technical advice.
So yes, you see it again.
Yeah, so I guess a couple more questions. So basically, with regards to the smart scale projects, are we proposing to fund any projects that are smart scale currently other than Route 1 Enon Road?
John, do you know the one?
Good question.
Don't know it off the top. You remember we were requested to look at some of those, so
Yeah, I think those are the two primary ones that are currently smart scale that requested additional funding.
There's Route 1 Enon Road, and what's second?
What was the second one? Sorry, I don't have.
Are the Enon, sorry, are the small scale ones in yellow?
Yes. Stafford Borough sidewalks would have been one.
That's
Bad.
not.
That's not smart scale. Why's not highlighted then?
So I guess the second kind of big question is basically if it would be okay to kind of, for FAMPO to do allocations in August and all that. I mean, why can't we wait maybe to do some of these allocations, or maybe all of them, until the summer? Like, why does it have to be done by May?
Well, we can.
Susan has her hand up.
Susan.
So some of the more out years, that you could absolutely just put up properly down in your balance entries and be done with it. Some of this needs to be assigned to a project, and we need to start obligating the funds. A lot of these funds have a sunset deadline date that they have to be obligated, not just allocated, but obligated on project. So probably your previous and your first year, I would definitely say you're gonna need to program to a project.
So we can park in the balanced entry FY28 and FY29 again if we want to,
Yes.
but we can't do that with the old money.
Right, the older money has got a sunset date that it would then turn into, and when I go through this list, I have to make sure that, whatever some of this sunset dates have on some of this money, you might tell me to put CMAQ on the project, and I'm gonna go search for the oldest CMAQ money, and I'm gonna put on the project that is advancing the quickest. And that's what I do. So, but that's some of the reasoning behind it. And they would also like for us to, because there is that previous on the new money, the carbon money, that needs to be programmed as well. Okay.
All right, any other questions, Paul?
So I had another general question. So like in the prioritization methodology, kind of for the STBG, it's 60, 15, 15, 10 on kind of the modal kind of split breakout. CMAQ is 65, 20, 15. I mean, it seems like there's been more funding put towards the studies, and like on the STBG side, it seems like the studies are around a third. I don't recall kind of the TAC or the subcommittee ever kind of agreeing to that. And that's a difference from the methodology. It seems like there could be some other changes, but how closely did we follow the modal splits from the approved methodology?
So I asked John this on Friday or Thursday or sometime, and basically the approach taken, if you go through the slots, is that the CMAQ and STGB money that we received followed exactly those splits.
So the
There
CRP.
were two rounds of funding allocation that staff did, is the way I understand. The first round, they followed exactly the split, right? 65, whatever. There is no, we don't have a methodology to deal with the CRP funding. So then staff went back and projects that had a lot of STBG on that could take CMAQ money, put that money onto those projects, which freed up additional STGB money. And it's that STGB money which they then allocated to projects and studies, then skews that allocation. That's how.
Yeah, if you look at the total amount of studies funded, particularly in FY24, it's like 1.2 million, and we have 1.3 million of CMAQ that we've kind of moved around to push all that money forward. So we're mostly consuming a lot of our CRP funding or using that to free up money to be able to work year the studies.
So in that second round, it distorts the allocations effectively because we've got this new amount of money. There's no methodology to allocate it. We've made up a methodology, and basically what we've done is just freed up more STGB money. And so we've ended up funding on the STGB side by utilizing the carbon reduction funds to allocate more STGB to certain projects. If you don't want to do that, you can change it. There's no requirement that we do that, but that's just an explanation. Am I right? That's correct. That's an explanation of how the staff did that. There's some logic to it. If you fund the studies, it gives you the opportunity to bid for more federal and state money on those projects that come out of the studies. You can equally decide not.
So I guess the concern is not that most of the CRP money went effectively into STBG. It's just that it seems like we didn't follow the modal splits with that.
Afterwards.
Right. It seems like it kind of almost exclusively went to studies. And that kind of created a lot more money for studies. And I just say, like, from an applicant standpoint, like if we'd known there was 1.8 million available, and Stafford probably would be in the same boat, probably would have applied differently. And that's kind of like a major change. And I know that basically was said that, the goal was just to have kind of 2 projects per category. I mean, now basically on the studies, we have a lot of study.
Yeah.
Projects like, I think 6.
So you're right in terms of the outcome. The question is, we don't have a methodology to deal with money that is new. Like, remember the HIP funding?
Right.
So we did the same thing with the HIP funding. We didn't actually have a methodology. So then people argued for which projects needed funding, and we took like kind of a globular approach to what everybody thought was important. And we used the HIP funding particularly for studies. Remember, that's how we funded the East-West study, and we funded, I forget what the other projects were, but because there's no methodology. So in the allocation before the carbon reduction funds, the percentages are correct. But when that's introduced, the carbon reduction funding, I think that the allocation is done in a similar way, funding studies and other things with that funding. Yeah. I mean, we can take the funding off of the studies and put it on something else, but then, Sylvania studies would lose some money. Stafford study could potentially lose money. The FAMPO study could lose money.
So I guess my question
High
is,
capacity transit study could lose money.
to move this along, are we making a suggestion for that round to go back to the normal methodology, or does somebody have an additional recommendation for what we should be doing, just so we can move this point forward?
I think just more of a discussion point, but I think to Paul's point, our understanding was the money is available in FY 20 and 29. We don't really have any studies that we know of that we're going to need to be doing in FY 20 and 29. If our understanding was, hey, it's going to be X amount of bills in FY 24, we certainly would have worked amongst ourselves, worked with the board to decide on what our priorities for FY 24. And we would have made a very different decision on what projects we submitted.
So you still have time to make that decision. I don't think that's.
I understand the point. However, there's no way we could have known I mean, I didn't even know there was carbon reduction funding until we got the email saying, here's the money, right? So we couldn't prepare for it. So, I mean, you can take a view. Can I ask a question just to clarify? In terms of the actual list of projects we're funding, forget about how much money we put on them because we can change all those amounts over the next month. In terms of the projects that we are proposing to fund, are we okay with the list of projects? That's one thing. Then the second thing is which money we're putting on which project. I think more discussion sounds like we want to have more discussion on the actual dollar allocations, and that's fine. But if we want to add additional projects or change the list of projects, that's a much bigger conversation.
So I guess this kind of gets to the heart of the question that I asked. Basically, if we go by the modal splits on STBG, then the project mix would change. I'll say that there are also, I think, some issues with the timing of the funding. I guess I would just use the example of like our Harrison Road, basically new interchange study. We actually don't need the funding basically in FY24 for that. Basically, we think I asked for the funding in FY20 and 29. I say something like the Exit 126 Orphan Blue project. I guess I would defer to VDOT like on kind of what the timing is needed for that. But we would want to make sure that like the FY27 funding on that could actually be used by the project.
I think my only comment was in that, with the understanding there's money available for studies in FY24, I think we certainly have a study or two that we would like to have gotten funded with that. So that'd be my only consideration on the number of projects.
So we can't reopen the call for projects right now. What we could do is park. No, we can't even park all the carbon reduction funding. We've got to allocate the first few years of it. I mean, I'm open.
So do we, okay, let's make sure we clarify the question, and I know y'all want to ask more questions, but we are not going to be here all day. Does anybody have an issue with the current list of projects? Then we can figure out what's next. And if you do, that's okay, but I just want to answer Ian's question. Does anybody have an issue with the current list? Because Susan's telling us spend it or she's going to take it, and y'all know she's going to take it.
I know, it's not me, it's just, that's what
It sounds better when it comes to you. So.
And I just have the same comment I made earlier. If the river crossing study drops off, I think we should look at funding and separate crossing. I'll make one other comment. I appreciate Paul clarifying what you're talking about with funding, so we kind of understand where you're coming from regarding Harrison Road, and that's a significant amount of that's more than understand that. I do appreciate being creative with the carbon funds because that pushed money to studies in 24, and that's something that we talked about a lot. Part of the plan. Money for studies in 28, 29, when I think you're going through that now, Matt, where it's like, what are we going to study again? With the times and change of it. Doing that, we put money into studies that I think will be usable. So I do appreciate that aspect of it, but I certainly do understand what you're saying, Paul. That's a big chunk.
If you want to push funding on to studies later, that's fine. But I think we have taken the view that, and we discussed this in, was it November?
Yes.
The question is that if you
the IIJA funds available earlier and sooner, we need to be funding studies.
Yeah, that was said in the November TAC. So if we don't do that, you put money to studies in FY28 and 29 rather than now, you have two potential problems. The first one is your priorities might change by FY28, and then you've got a study funded, and then it's the whole Garrisonville Road thing. Now we actually don't want that study. Now we want this other study. And the second thing is that the study leads to projects which you can then get funded before 28 and 29. If you don't do the study in FY24, you then, it doesn't just mean that you do the study only in FY28. It means you can't apply for the funding for the project until some years after that, and then you've got 7 years to wait again. So you then condemn that project to 13 or 15 years before you actually get it.
And one more thing, just because this is probably not completely obvious, is that even with the study fund balance here, there's no one project other than Gateway Boulevard that could be fully funded to completion earlier than what it's currently. So there was no other project that we could accelerate with those projects to deliver.
Is this not enough money or what?
Yeah, there's not enough money.
And your Enon project, we've funded it up to the 10% cap. You can still get more money, but we at TAF are not allowed to, under the policy recommended. The policy committee has to decide to fund the extra.
And that's the
What
reason.
we're suggesting, and I'm hoping that the information we have is that some money will possibly come out of the C2B meeting in May, I think, that would then fund that. So you may find it's fully funded anyway, but we don't know because we don't know.
Oh,
And
So this is a suggestion on the studies, and I completely get that the previous and FY24 funding all has to be kind of allocated. But you could effectively swap some of that out and then set aside some of that STBG funding for studies in FY25 or let's say 26, then save it for the next round of projects, so then everyone has the same chance to basically apply for that funding. That's what I would recommend.
And that was my recommendation from November, was create some sort of earlier year set of money that we can be allocating towards studies. Because you just can't plan for 6 years out for a study.
Yeah,
If
I
it's
think,
for the outer years, we can settle it, but if it's in the previous first year, I'm not gonna be able to.
they're saying 25.
And this is 25, 26.
Yeah, you're gonna have to process in place, because you're gonna have to definitely allocate it to next year.
But there would be another call projects this fall.
Allocating for a project that's gonna be able to start very soon too, not just you allocate and it's gonna be sitting there for 5 years.
If it's study, it should be possible to do that.
if you can I just ask a question, and just because I know you're going to want to make changes to the list, to the dollar values. Your was it the Harrison Road study? Which was the one you said?
It's the, and just to explain the logic behind this, so basically, we do want a new I-95 interchange at Harrison Road. However, we don't have Harrison Road funded to be 4 lanes. That has to happen before that can occur. We think it's going to take us about 5 years to get there. So there's the smaller, pardon me, the smaller Harrison Road project, which we do want kind of FY24 is great. But in terms of just that larger project for the new interchange study, we had requested 28 or 29 for that. So that could be pushed back. And maybe that would help with some of these other issues. I said with the Orphan Blue X and 126 project, we had a question about the funding timing for that. We kind of made our best guess on the information kind of we gave to FAMPO staff. Or say, I mean, VDOT is administering that project. They have kind of a innovative project delivery process for that. They may have better thoughts on the timing for that money. Yeah, and 27 might be too late. I'm not sure.
So we would look to VDOT to give us.
Construction funds on that next calendar year.
Okay. So 27 is probably too late.
Maybe, yes.
Yeah, unless you got an earlier one.
Unless we have our- That project.
I mean,
when we go to sign
is-
those,
is it? I don't know the answer to this. I'm thinking on the fly now. Is it possible to shift some money from the study to the Orphan Blue, or is it different kind of money?
I mean, could I shift it? Yes. Am I going to be able to get Orphan Blue to that fully funded category? No. Like I can take all of the like 27 and before money basically onto Orphan Blue, and I'll still come up.
Is that because it fails one of those caps, or is that because it's just such a lot of money?
There's not enough money
Not enough money
for FY28. I have
to
to
fully fund it.
FY28 work with the swap to make it work.
So we can fund it, yeah, some of it earlier, but to 100%, probably not.
So just a question with that, like, isn't that though, that it's like the top rated highway projects? Isn't the issue with that just that kind of the money went to the studies? So there's not enough kind of previous to, I guess, the 5th year or 4th year and basically fund kind of existing or kind of new projects, such as highway projects?
I could have taken, because it's a new project and accounting for all existing cost increases that have been requested, there would not be a pot of funds large enough in FY 23 to 27 to accelerate the work on the wood project. I have to pull FY 28 dollars and then swap it with an existing project that would then make it capable of going into FY 27.
So I guess the question is, what happened to all the previous FY 27 money for highway projects? Where did it go?
So you're asking where did all the previous FY 27 funds go?
So
You have it on the existing exit 26 project for about $1 million. There was Enon Road or Onville Road money that had to be moved. I mean,
All right, real quick, I'm gonna let Susan comment because we're going down a dark rabbit hole that we're not gonna
Can I
do.
just ask a question? So what I'm hearing from you, Paul, is you were wanting to fund Orphan Blue first
Yes.
and then move your Harrison Road interchange out.
Yes.
Why don't y'all just move the money on
Up to your own project.
the Harrison Road interchange up to Orphan Blue, go up to 27 and move the money on 27 down to Orphan Blue?
And I don't have an issue with that. The question I had is,
Your
yeah.
project, it would fund Orphan Blue earlier, and then it would push your interchange study out to FY 27.
and still fund both projects.
Still fund both projects.
and I don't have an issue with that. I guess it's,
2 million versus $500,000. Like I can move $500,000.
Wait, don't try to do all that, because that's not your job. Because at this point, what I'm hearing, I could be wrong, Paul, what I'm hearing Susan saying is when we're swapping money within our own projects, that's our business.
Yeah.
You don't gotta worry about that. Paul's question is something different. What are you asking?
well, that was part of it. The other part is basically the project wasn't quite fully funded. My question is, I mean, isn't it possible to do that with some of the previous and FY 24 to 27 monies?
So I have a question, just you've done the spreadsheet. Took off the schedules on here. There's no dates, and it has no total estimate on here. So if you have the dates on, you don't know when some of these projects are going. So I'm here to talk about the schedules. Talk about ongoing, talk about Enon. I know where they are in project development. They're here. So these other projects we're talking about are like closer to the finish line. So that could be consideration when you're programming funds. They have some previous funds on them. They're not going to use them as fast because the project is not as far along. The other thing to talk about is estimate. It's just getting a total estimate on the project is know how much money it doesn't have. Just interested to know how far off.
So we can put the total cost estimate in a column. That's easy to do. Which dates did you want on the spreadsheet?
He's talking about
I've already did an eye test on it. I tried to reduce.
I know. It's
It gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that spreadsheet.
Just have all your base dates on here. Construction. It's right away. Some of that, it depends on where you want to run it.
So we can put those ones that were on the old spreadsheet. However, with the new projects, we don't have those dates. We have some, yes.
You have dates for any project entered through an application-based program. Because they're part of that application-based program.
Correct, but the new projects are not like that. New projects don't have a UPC yet. They don't have anything.
Any project that was entered
Just
through
the
an application-based program had a schedule. It just might be pretty far. You have the schedule.
Dr. Paul?
So this is just a suggestion, instead of maybe trying to get all the projects like this in one sheet, to switch it. Well, to go this way and to go for two sheets.
Yeah.
And maybe basically some of the legacy projects, like I'll say like number 4, the old GW Ride Connect project. I'm not sure if that has to be shown at this time. Ones that don't have kind of stations that are new in the previous through FY 29 period may not have to be shown at this time. So you might be able to kind of condense down the number of projects shown and might enable things to be kind of a larger font and just to have some of the additional information that VDOT requested.
So there's money on it. And so now
So we,
I've been working with them. As soon as they finish spending that money, I'm gonna close number 4 out. I'm gonna start with number 7.
I mean, what we can do is that we can have more than one page, right? We can create a page, say, for old projects and a page for new projects. So we can do that. That's easy to do.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my original question, just because I want to make sure that we're making a little bit of progress. Do you need to know today whether we're accepting this list as is, not the money, the list as is, or you do not need to know that today?
So that question, it goes back to whether or not I need to do public comment. Because if I need to do public comment, I have to show the public something. So that's the issue is that, and I'm hearing that we probably shouldn't make federal allocations without the public having some comment.
Okay, so quick question for the group. Does anybody have any issues with this list? Don't talk about money, let's just talk about this list, because I just want to decide if we have an issue with this list, so if he needs to move forward with public comment, we can on just the list. Does anybody have an issue with the list?
Just the consideration of studies projects.
I mean, just the list, not how money is assigned, just the list.
Yeah.
Is there something on here that you don't want?
We had
That you don't like.
no, the consideration of study funding being available in
So-
FY 24, and we would have done things
So
differently.
you want that, the two comments I've heard on this are there might be additional projects that we might want to get on the list. And I would suggest that we do that in August. But
Does anybody have any issue with that suggestion, Paul?
So I don't have an issue with that suggestion. I did want to make the point that our board members do not support the river crossing study. So we are unlikely to support basically the SPG allocation kind of for that project.
Sure. And that's the dollar stuff, so I'm okay with.
That's the actual project. Like, we would not support that project being on the list.
Right, but you can still say, I reject a particular project without saying, so for example, I might say your project, that'll get me fired, but, So-
Yeah, I can take it.
It won't get you fired.
it might, but.
Pick his highway project.
But does anybody else have, and I'm hearing what Spotsylvania is saying, but does anybody have any issues? Spotsylvania is saying at this time they don't support the river crossing project, which I get, and you stated that before, and we can include that in our comments or notes for our recommendation to FAMPO. But does anybody have any issue with the list of projects that as presented, and with a caveat in the note that any new projects will be discussed or studies will be discussed in August? Does anybody have any issue with that?
And I would suggest that we actually make a recommendation from this body that we revisit in August, so that we formally record it in the minutes that we're going to come back and have another look in August, or to resolve some of these issues, because by August we will know the answers to those other questions. Are we going to get any money back? We don't know. And are all of the studies going to be supported by the policy committee, which we don't know. So I would say that in August, we're going to revisit it, and we formally document that we
Sure.
do revisit it in August.
And make a consideration that in August, we have a discussion about studies funding and when it is available.
And you could effectively say in August, you want another call for projects, a limited call or something. Or whatever. The point is,
Anyway, with the TMX.
I just think that we should have a review in August.
Because I'm trying to address Susan's point right now. I just don't want us to be in a position where we lose any money. And I do respect Spotsylvania County wanting to remove the river crossing study. So if you want to put that as part of your motion, you're more than welcome to. Or if somebody wants to present the motion that we just discussed, which is that we approve the list as presented and have the note that in August we will consider new projects related to studies. And what's the other piece?
Consideration of earlier year funding for studies when we apply.
In consideration of earlier year study,
Funding for studies.
funding for studies. So is that a motion anybody can make in this 5 seconds?
Can I just ask kind of one question here?
Sir?
Just on like the total amount of funding, I know that Stafford had gone through and they thought that all the funding wasn't allocated. We looked at it and saw that like the balance entry for 24 wasn't allocated. do we think at this point there really is significant additional funding to be allocated? Do we think
There's a
not-
small amount, so in earlier email, it did not include all of the, FAMPO set aside or the GW Ride Connect, did not include the, budgeting error, the little bit additional money that was required to accelerate Blue project. So there was a little bit of money, there is I would say,
Like 200 or something.
200,000 that I have intentionally left as basically wiggle room in the approach, just in case if there is the need for more money, as well as understanding that there's a 10% project that's requesting more than 10%. So that's going to potentially impact if the policy committee decides to say, no, we want to fully fund that one. So yeah, there's intentional built in right now that there's a small amount of funds available, but that is only so that I can incorporate any changes that y'all.
You can also allocate that in August, but if the policy committee uses that 10% rule and says we want to fund, and I think the only one applicable is Enon.
Yes.
If the policy committee decides they want to fund Enon with some more money, there's a little bit of money lying around that we could put there.
Clawing back 100,000 versus clawing back 300,000 is fairly significant depending on which project we're talking about.
So going back to the study suggestion about trying to create a kind of a pot of funding for studies in FY 25, 26, was the regional consensus on that going forward? I know Stafford and spots of any kind of agreed to that, but did the rest of the group agree with that?
Just a reminder, we don't necessarily have a lot of FY 25 or 26. That's what's driving.
Well, things would have to be swapped out.
I mean,
Well, I think that it's interesting. I think we're satisfied with the way the study funding is shaking out here in this round for what we got funding. So we need that in the immediate future. So if your suggestion is to kind of shift what is, this here, again, I think for what we got funded in our studies in 24 is what we need. And the process going forward, we're going to talk about that. I think that we're all committed to making sure that the methodology is working the way we all need it to. We can see playing that way.
wouldn't that be part of the FY 25, August discussion?
And also the subcommittee, I would recommend that you put a section in the CMAC methodology that creates a fund for studies and however you want to do it, or whatever. I'll administer whatever's in the policy. But I suggest we add that to the policy that we are going to allocate whatever it is to studies and we're going to put it in this particular field.
All right, so any other comments, questions?
I guess I'll make one additional comment. If we're not talking about money that's allocated, and we have a couple projects on there that maybe have a future, maybe don't. And again, I'm talking about the river crossing study. I suggest that we add the VCR trail crossing, at least at Route 3, to the project list without any funding or any consideration of funding, just so that it tracks forward as a potential tool placement.
Would that be in August or would that be today? What are you asking?
We're talking about approving this list or making a recommendation on this list. I think that's what we do here. We just make recommendations. Then I would ask to consider that.
Well, first of all, is it the next most high scored project?
Yes, and it's kind of within a point or two between, or a tenth of a point between the current second place recipient. It's very close. I mean, for roadways, there's a big gap between 2 and 3. We tried to look at where the gaps kind of fell with the 3 project recommendation. The trick with that is that both the first and second place score projects are still partially funded. So they did not receive the full allocation requested. So it would be bypassing those to award additional funds.
All right, so can you state the motion? I will make the motion because you're an alternate.
Sure.
So can you state the motion, or do you want me to help you?
Let me see if I can
Okay.
there, because I think there's a lot of good points. And we would recommend to move forward with this list, that we need to consider the place of a river crossing study, whether that is going to move forward or not. Then we'd add to the list to the VCR trail grade separated crossing at Route 3. Then in August, we'll revisit the funding based on CTB action. And that the 3 localities are looking for a way to move forward on closer funding for studies in the next funding rounds.
All right, so that is Jamie Jackson making that motion. Michelle's got a look on her face, so we're.
So is this departing from your prioritization methodology?
Yeah.
Because that is the,
Please.
not debating the merits of the project.
So
It's just when you.
I understand the question.
That is what you were to follow around.
Yep.
I completely understand the question. My private view, and you know I don't get a vote, my private view is we don't need to do all of that because we can say that in August we'll revisit the list when we know whether that money is available. So we can, because we still have the list of projects, they were submitted, they're all scored. We have them. It's not like we're going to have to open up.
So
a
it's
new
already
process.
there.
It's already there, we just haven't funded it. My answer to Michelle's question is a very important question. And the answer to that is that the methodology is silent on how many projects that are scored you should be funding. It doesn't say, it just says start funding existing projects and then fund new projects from the top scoring one down. It doesn't tell you how far to go. And I think the assumption that we had, I don't know, Paul chaired the subcommittee, but the assumption I think was we'll fund as much money as we got, right? And we can't give any project more than 50% of the year's allocation. But if we don't get to the 50% because the project is like $1 billion project, then it just is meaningless. So the methodology doesn't answer that question. Another thing I think it should, so that we don't have to interpret it and then face somebody's anger because they don't like what we've done. It doesn't say. John and staff took that scored list and started funding from the top and realized that the you know, with GIS you have the what are the breaks called in GIS?
Oh, yeah, change breaks.
The natural breaks. There's a natural break roughly after the second project in each category in each year. There's a rough natural break there. There's nothing in the methodology that tells us what to do. So those other projects are all still there. They're all still scored. They're all still on the list. The proposal is not to allocate funding to them because there's like a natural break in most categories after the second one, but it's still there as the third
So it
project.
doesn't need to be added
So we don't need to
add that language in the motion.
add it. What we need to do is agree that we will revisit the list in August, which gives us a lot more time to deal with the answer to whether VDOT's going to, or not VDOT, the CTB is going to fund the shortfall in smart scale projects and whether or not the studies are all going to be supported by the policy committee. We will know the answer. We will still have the list. Then we meet in August and decide whether we're going to allocate the funding as you've just suggested.
Okay, so clarification on the motion then. So the motion is to accept the list of projects that all don't fit on the spreadsheet. So to accept the list of projects that have been presented or provided by FAMPO staff that have been submitted, that we will review the FY, and we'll review in August, adding additional projects that may not be included as a committee. So we will review, add, and or evaluate
From the list that was scored.
from the list that was scored. And that's it then. Because then any projects that needed to be added or removed, those will be addressed once the CDP.
Once we know how much money is available.
Correct. Does anybody have any issue with, well, I'm not gonna ask because that's my motion. Can I get a second?
Can I just make a comment?
After a second.
A second.
All right, Melody, second. Discussion and comments.
So we do not support the river crossing study. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, do we really need to make this decision today? I mean, it seems like it might be good for the subcommittee to meet kind of once before the FAMPA policy committee and just kind of talk through some of these issues because I'm not sure we're all on the same page right now.
The subcommittee doesn't have the authority to make a recommendation to the policy committee. This body does. The subcommittee can make suggestions. This body would need to convene again if you want to make a recommendation.
Okay, maybe a special TAC meeting then.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I am convinced that people want to change the funding allocations to projects. That I'm convinced about. I'm hearing clearly that Spotsylvania doesn't want to support the river crossing study. Totally clear. I'm not clear why we can't adopt the list of, no, not adopt, recommend the list of projects for public comment.
For public comment.
If we're, other than the one that Spotsylvania doesn't believe should be supported, which I understand and accept, why we can't put the list of projects out for public comment from today, with the understanding, which we always do, that we can tweak the details of projects, including how much money each one gets during the course of the public comment period, which allows us then to meet as a subcommittee, because that subcommittee doesn't need to have a formal bylaw that allows it to make recommendations. It recommends back to the TAC, and the TAC then takes a decision with the amended list of allocations to recommend the allocations to the May policy meeting. So it absolves us of having to do that. I mean, you can state on the record that you do not support that particular project being included in the list. We can put that in the minutes too.
So I guess the question that I have is just based on the assumption that kind of all the available STPG funding went to studies. I mean, if it had been done according to the prioritization methodology, it seems like maybe the results might have been different. And that kind of gives us pause.
Yeah, and we're still not, so what we're still not doing, which we can do at the next subcommittee meeting, is talking about money. We're just, my point that I made was basically to make sure that we can start the process as Susan is saying the clock needs to start by.
Right, but with my point, there's an issue if you don't have all that study money, there might not be as many study projects funded. And I don't know, there might be some other project funded, maybe basically another bike ped project, for instance.
Correct, which we would talk about the dollars at that time.
But I mean, that would change the projects though.
All suggesting that we might need to add an additional project or two if we don't fund study. That's what it suggests.
Yeah,
We'd have to subtract a couple of additional studies, so it could be some changes.
If I could make one comment, Paul, I understand what you're saying and getting into the details. And if we want to focus on that more, I think that's okay. Just working in land use, you might have that discussion with public comment. So that's personally why I don't necessarily oppose the motion here. I think I'd support it to put this out for public comment. I think we want all of that input. I hate for us to get into it and really focus on a bunch of details and then go to a public comment and then have to do it again. So I don't mind moving forward. If that's what we're talking about today, is moving this list forward for public comment. We already have our technical comments here, but it sounds like we need to work on more. That's pretty clear. But I don't mind moving forward with public comment. That's a distinction that you guys are making here.
And I can make sure that a friendly amendment to my own motion is that it's for public comment, just for the public comment process. So just if we add stuff, great. If we change stuff, great. If Spotsylvania or anybody else submits a comment to say we need to make this edit, I'm totally okay with that. I just want to make sure that we have that time so we don't lose out. That's literally what my goal is.
Okay, and just clarification, this is not the TAC saying we approve this project list.
This is TAC recommending that we use the list that is provided by FAMPO staff for projects, move forward in the public comment process so that these draft allocations, not the dollars, but the project lists can be commented on by the public.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes.
All right.
Quick clarification, when we come back in August, will that be a subcommittee meeting or a TAC meeting?
No, the TAC.
TAC.
Yeah, that'll have to be a formal thing. We'll talk beforehand.
Are you guys talking about our methodology subcommittee? Is that? Is there
No, we need to have the methodology subcommittee.
So the subcommittee is going to rewrite the document to improve it, not rewrite it, but improve the document because it has lots of these loopholes, and I'm honestly tired of having these. Like I can't answer Michelle's question because the methodology is silent. It doesn't say what I should do. Like I prefer that it said what I should do, then I didn't have to deal with this. And we should have a section which says what to do if we get HIP money out of the blue, or if we get CRP money out of the blue, or we get whatever else. There should just be a section saying we will do it with the following things, right? So because we get this very short timeline every year. So we have plenty of time to talk about the scoring, but not enough time to talk about the funding allocations because it's a very short process and it happens every single year. And that's, where we are.
All right, and to move this forward for VDOT's perspective, do we have to have any dollars shown, or can we just show the list?
I think we should just show the list as
Can we
it
show
is.
the list, or do we have to show dollars for public comment, even the draft dollars?
To show the list, and that's not a,
Okay,
and it's, and I checked with, central office, and they said, read what your public involvement plan is. You should follow that when this list out, whether you need to have a public hearing,
okay,
but.
all right. Melody, do you accept my change to that motion? All right, any other comments or questions? And we do have all the notes from the jurisdictions on their comments for this, but again, this is for public comment, so we can address the issue with VDOT. And does VDOT staff, Michelle or Linda, have anything else to make sure we don't screw up on? Okay.
So just can you clarify before you close this item? In fact, can you just ask for those in favor? But can you just clarify, are you telling me to put out the list with the dollar values, or are you telling me to put out the list without the dollar values?
At this point, I am recommending as part of my motion to put out the list. If you had a total dollar value that was correct, I would put that out there, but I'm not gonna make that motion. I'm just saying put out the list because that's what VDOT said that we had to do.
Just asking you what I need to do, because
Okay.
I have to do whatever.
And follow whatever, or follow whatever is in the, yeah,
Okay.
what's in your, public involvement plan.
Okay.
Because if it requires you to put a total dollar fine, but don't allocate it to the projects. That is my motion. Melody has accepted my friendly amendments to my motion. We've had our discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Are any opposed? Thank you so much, but it looks like we got some work to do on the back end, and I appreciate that.
I'm amazed actually that everybody supported it. I was
Because we had to
expecting.
get those questions and commas and.
No, but it
parentheses.
doesn't include, we're not supporting the dollar values and certain projects. I get that, but I'm just amazed that we did get a good vote.
Oh, it's not over. The battle is not won. All right,
There's a
anything else?
battle.
Yes, battle with my.
We now have the draft UPWP is the next item. I am not going to belabor this because I don't think there's just literally anybody, perhaps our public members, but for the committee members, I don't think anybody doesn't know what the UPWP is. We've tried to expand the UPWP this year to include all sorts of maybes, right? Because what we've found in the past is that in policy committee or the TAC asks me to do something and there's an item in the UPWP that allows me, then I have to go through, and this I have to do. It's required to have a 30-day public comment period on amendments to the UPWP. So we've added in things there which we may not necessarily get to in the next 12 months, but we've put them in there to avoid us having to go back and amend the UPWP. So for example, if the river crossing study falls off, it's in there, but we just won't work on it if we don't get the funding approved. We've put in there that we can do additional work on the freight summit recommendations. We might not get to do major work on that, but we've put it in there. We've put in there workshops. So if we want to have a workshop and hire somebody to facilitate a workshop, it's language that's more expressly in there. And we've done that. But also for complete streets and bike bed stuff, we put the language in there so that if anything like that occurs, we can just get on with it without amending the UPWP.
One comment on the UPWP, in consideration of the Route 610 study we just talked about, there was a mention that it might need to be in the UPWP. I don't believe it is in there.
It is.
Is it in there?
It is. Yes, it is in there, but it's not in there as a FAMPO work product. The line item says that the county will be supervising a study for the Route 610 project, blah, 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 blah.
We'll make sure and check the title of it as it.
That might be what it is. Okay, that's better.
Again, this is a draft for public comment. If you see any errors, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, please, we ask you to give us the fixes. If you see an error in the UPWP, just tell us. We're not perfect here. We're happy to take those comments, and if that needs to be amended, we'll amend it before it goes to the final vote. But we just need to, again, get it out for public comment so that we follow and this one is required. There's no debate on this. We have to have public comment.
So just a question, like with the river crossing study, like how was FAMPO able to do work on it this fiscal year if it's not in the current UPWP?
So the UPWP has language which indicates that we can do research on a project that arises within one of the FAMPO studies. And so this project arose in the East-West study recommended by VHB, and so we're doing work which is not requiring outside funding. We're just using staff time. And the UPWP allows us to do research on an existing, on a recommendation that comes out of an existing study or a recent study done by FAMPO. But there's no.
EDOT was okay with that?
There is no river crossing study. There is an east-west mobility study which we are building based on our recommendation. That was, yeah, we clarified that because that was. You know,
we've had emails back and forth to clarify each one of those details, and we're not putting at this stage any money into it. It's only staff time.
Ian,
yes, sir.
I just pulled up the UPWP and it's like not loading. It's like cut off after the first couple pages. So just want to check that for.
Carly, if you could just have a look at that, please,
Yeah.
to make sure that it properly loads.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on this resolution?
Question, are you looking for a deadline for staff comment on this?
Well, we have 30 days before we have to present the final version. So it's going to come back to the TAC. So if you can give us the comments like maybe in 3 weeks, because then we need a week to make any amendments to put it into the pack for the next TAC meeting. So over the next 3 weeks is fine.
All right, can I get a motion to endorse resolution 23-19 for the public comment period for the draft fiscal year 2024 UPWP?
Motion to approve.
All right, Paul, can I get a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor or any discussion? All
Aye.
those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carried. All right, next item. Item E, discussion regarding CMAQ STBG transit spot allocation.
So I guess I have a suggestion, just given the time, I mean, this basically doesn't have to be done right away. Can we defer this maybe to a future either subcommittee or TAC meeting?
Sure. Does anybody have any issue with that? All right, and I will just reply all of my comments to the group that, and I don't know if Dr. Snyder or have any comments to this one as well, because it impacts you. Just take a look at it.
I mean, it's not urgent, right? I mean,
No, but I would just say, so we can get it done before, never mind, we don't need that.
Yeah.
All right, next item. Melody's got y'all, when I'm going.
Chairperson,
Sir.
before we get to correspondence, if I just may ask, is this your last meeting as chair, or will you be in the May?
God willing, I will be here in May.
Okay, thank you.
And if somebody needs to take me out, Melody will know where my bag is for that.
If the ambulance arrives, we'll ask one of the vice chairs to take up a meeting.
Right. We already got Matt in tow. Matt said, don't grab the baby bag. Melody's got the baby bag. All right.
Are you reading Robert's Rules of Orders as your bedtime reading?
All right, item
Because
E.
I don't know, when Paul and Mike get going, it might be a rough meeting. Good luck.
Don't hit anybody with it. All right, correspondence. That was in your meeting packet. If anybody has any questions or comments or concerns, I don't know if staff has anything.
There's nothing major in there,
Okay,
if I recall correctly anyway.
I didn't see anything. All right, staff reports, the FY24 rural work program.
So we're presenting that to you. It's not actually for TAC to do anything with, because this is a GRC rural work program. The FAMPO have jurisdiction, but we like transparency and that, and if anybody sees any issues with it, to alert us. EDOT, this is the point where if you want me to remove the smart safe streets for all project and put it into this one, it's not currently in the rural one. So if you want me to do that, if you can let me know, I will ask Carrie to add it to real work plan. It's not currently, but it's just a weird study with, funding that's unusual. So it's just difficult to know for certain which. Thank you.
All right, and member reports, any notification of changes to cost estimates on sample projects to VDOT that staff needs to share or any of the jurisdictions? All right, any notification of new transportation projects by localities, not the ones that we're gonna talk about in August? All right, our next meeting is May 1st. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to, second.
All right, all those in favor
Ready.
say aye.
Aye.
All right,
Yeah.
aye.
I knew.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good, Paul. How are you doing, man?
Pretty good.
I have to admit.
I would, I,
It wasn't looking good.